Hello again and welcome to the next video in my FPTS series. This one again will be covering some of the functionality of the option type. The functionality we'll be looking at today is the error handling. We've already done some getOrElse, but we're going to look into alt, and I will briefly show you what the W means on the end of these. We will also be taking the time to look at the tryCatch interoperability and showing you how that works because you'll probably use it. And then we will look at some of the refinements, being isSome and isNone. In the last video, we did a lot of very small little snippets to show you how things worked. So in this one, I wanted to kind of bring it all together with the new concept so that you could see a little better how it works. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to import some of the stuff we know we need. We know we need pipe and predicate because we're going to make a little bit more of a full-featured function. We know we're going to need from predicate if we use predicate, and we're going to use some, none, isNone, isSome, option, altW, getOrElse, and getOrElseW, and map from FPTS option. So what we're going to do this time is a little bit more of an application. Not sure how familiar you would be with Bible verses, but with Bible verses you can have a book query where you say, I want the book of Job. This is just the whole book of Job. You can say, I would like to get a chapter in the book of Job. So this would be book of Job chapter 1. You can also get a verse. I can say I want Job chapter 1 verse 2, which is book of Job chapter 1 verse 2. So we're going to enumerate these possibilities into a type. We're going to call it search type, and we have a book type, which is if you just put the book. We have the chapter type if you put just the chapter. We have the verse type if you include the verse, or we have the none, and we're going to return one of these as a string at the end of our program. Our program is going to look at an object that gets passed in and then calculate whether or not, or which one of these strings that should evaluate to. And so we will make a type that the user will pass in. We'll call it a Bible search, and it can take a book, which we will make an option of string. It can take a chapter, which is an option of number, and it can take a verse, which is an option of number. Now, depending on which one of these is entered, tells you which one of these search types it'll be. If they enter just the book and no chapter or no verse, then it will be a book type. If they enter a book and a chapter, but not a verse, then it will be a chapter type. If they enter a book, chapter, verse, it will be a verse type. If they don't have any of these conditions, like if they put chapter and verse and not book or something like that, it will be a type none. So we're going to need to be able to do some logic on this, right? Normally you would do a bunch of if statements to figure out, hey, is this a book, a chapter, a verse? You would say if book and chapter and verse, then return verse. But we're not going to do that. We're going to use predicates. So we've used predicates in the previous video, so we'll do it again. So I will make a book predicate. This will detect if it is a book, and we will say predicate of Bible search. So the Bible search type is up there, so this will take book, chapter, and verse. We'll go ahead and get those arguments out of there. And what we're going to do is we're going to use isNone and isSome to figure out if it's a book. So we want to return isSome book. So if book is a none, this will return false. If book is a sum, it will return true. That's what the first refinement is sum. And we are looking for no chapter. So we want chapter to be none. And then verse if there's no chapter, it doesn't make sense to have a verse at all. And so we don't really need to worry about the verse on this one. So next, we will do a chapter predicate. And again, it's a predicate of Bible search. And it is going to be book, chapter, verse. And you do need the verse in this case, because if the verse is there and the book and chapter, then it's going to be a verse predicate, or a verse instead of a chapter. So we're going to do the same thing. We'll say book always has to be there, and the chapter needs to be there, and the verse needs to be none. If this is true, then it's a chapter. Next, we will make a verse predicate, which is also a predicate of Bible search. And we're going to have book, chapter, and verse again. And this predicate, we want all of them to be there. isSome book, isSome chapter, isSome verse. So if it's not a book, and it's not a chapter, and it's not a verse, we're going to return none. And in case you were wondering about what I'm doing right here, if you've not seen this before, this is called deconstructing the argument. So we know, because I set the type to predicate of Bible search, that it will be a Bible search that's passed in. And if you put the parts you want between these two curly brackets, it will just pull them out of the Bible search into a variable you can use in your code. That said, now we're going to make some functions that are going to do the work of getting the label based on the predicate. We have the predicate, so we need to take that a step further, run some logic and say, is this predicate true? So we'll call the first one get book, and it will take a Bible search. We're not going to deconstruct this one because we don't need to. It'll get deconstructed when we pass it in. So we are going to return whatever the pipe outputs. We're going to pass our search into it. We're going to check if it's the predicate. The predicate we're interested in checking is the book predicate. If the book predicate, if this is true, then this will pass that into here, and this will come out as a sum. If it's not true, it'll come out as a none. And from there, we want to map to a new type. We don't really care what's in the Bible search. If we get to this map, it means it is a sum. And in the case that it is a sum, we want to return a string. And so we are going to map this to book. If you look at get book here, it says it returns an option of a string, which isn't what we want. We made a search type, right? So we need to get that on here. Almost all of the FPTS functions are actually template functions, so you can give it the type. Map usually takes two arguments to the template function. The first one is what's coming in. So the thing that's coming in is Bible search. If we had a variable here, I'll put one here temporarily and we'll look at it in a second. That should be a Bible search. The second is what is coming out. And what should be coming out is a search type. So if we look at this A, it's a Bible search. And if we look at get book now, it returns an option of search type, which is exactly what we want. We don't need this, so we're going to put it back as underscore, signifying we don't need it. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing for get chapter and get verse. And I'll type as fast as I can, so maybe I'll speed up the video so you don't have to watch me sit here typing. You might notice here that we've just typed the same code twice, which says we could use a helper function. So I'm going to write one because I don't like typing more than I have to, and I don't like more code than I need to. So I'm going to call it get from predicate. And this is going to take a Bible search, because they all take a Bible search. It's going to take a predicate of Bible search, because they all use a predicate of Bible search. And then it's going to take a type of search type. And we're going to pass all these things in, and then we're going to just do our stuff in here. So we're going to take the search, we're going to do from predicate, and it's going to be the predicate we passed in, and then we're going to map that to the search type that we passed in. So it's just type. And so now, instead of typing all this stuff out, I could just say return get from predicate, and I'm going to pass search, book predicate, and book. And it auto-completes because we have it all typed and it's all nice and neat. And now all of these are a one-liner.
Get from predicate, search chapter predicate, and chapter. And then lastly, we will have our get verse, also a Bible search. And we want to return get from predicate, search, verse, predicate, verse.
All right, so now we have the functions we need to figure out if it's a book, chapter, or verse. We just need to put them together. So this is where I'm going to introduce some of these error handling functions to you. So we'll make a new function called getSearchType. You're going to pass in a Bible search, and you're going to get out book, chapter, or verse. It's going to tell you what kind of search it is. So we're going to, again, return the output of pipe. And you could write this like this. I could go search, get book. But I wanted to show you, you can call a function as long as it returns a value on the first line. You don't have to do that. And the rest of the time, I'm going to be doing it this way. So this get book will return an option of search type. You can see here, this is an option of search type. And it's going to get the book, or it's going to get a none. Well, if it gets a none, how do we check for get chapter or get verse? Enter alt here. Alt means alternatively, if this is none, do this. If it's not none, if there is some there, it will not run the code in alt. So alt, we're going to pass a little function here, and we're going to say get chapter of search. And then we're going to do the same thing. If it's still a none, by this point, we want to get verse of search. And that should get a book, chapter, or verse. And then we're going to do getOrElse, which you saw in previous videos. What this does is it tries to get the value you passed in. In the case it's not there and it's a none, you can stop it from throwing an error by telling it what to say. And we're going to say none. If you look here now, it says this returns a string, not what we want. On this getOrElse templated again, you can tell it what you want, and we want a search type. So now, if you hover over here, it says it returns a search type. And if I come back here and I do this, look, it's nice and typed for me. So there we go. Now we have our whole search algorithm, and this should all work. And if you look carefully, there's no if statements. There's some booleans, there's some search type, there's some predicates, but this does not branch whatsoever. It's all flat. So we're going to run some tests. So the first test should return book. And on this one, we're just going to make a book search. And it is going to be of type Bible search. And for the book, we're going to do sum of Job, which gives us an option of sum of, and that holds the value Job. We're going to make a chapter of none. Remember, the none is a value, but it works for making a none, because none just has underscore tag none and nothing else. And then verse none. And that's going to be our little variable there, and that we're going to pass into our function. So then let's get the result. So we'll say book result is equal to, we called it get search type, and that takes a search. So we're going to pass in our book search, and then we will console.log the value of this, and we'll say book result. And if you look over here, it says, open this up a little, book search result, book. So it successfully got the book out of here, the response we wanted. So next, let's try to return a chapter.
I should make these capital. So we'll do the same thing. I'm going to copy and paste this to make it quick so you don't just watch me type all day. I'll just change the names of stuff.
And we'll call this chapter search. And we'll give sum, we'll say we want chapter 1. And then we want verse to be none. We'll call this chapter result instead of what we had before, and we will pass in chapter search instead of book search. And this should be chapter result and chapter search. So we should see over here, there's the last two. Book result, it got book. Chapter result, it got chapter. It was successful.
Then we had should return a verse. So again, we'll just copy and paste and make some changes. We'll call this now verse search.
We'll pass a sum of 2 into here. We'll call this verse result, and it needs to pass in verse search. And we are going to get the verse result. So now we see book, chapter, and verse. So the last case we need to check is if we have none.
And I didn't capitalize this. So we will take all of this stuff, paste it down here, and we will say none search. And all of these need to be none. We'll call it none result. Pass in our none search. And I also noticed that I didn't change this to verse.
And now, if we look at the last 4 things, book result, return book, chapter search, return chapter, verse search, return verse, none search, return none. So this behaves as expected. So we've now seen isNone and isSome. You saw none and some last time, and from predicate and predicate. And we've seen alt or getOrElse. The only thing I haven't shown, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, is altW and getOrElseW. In FPTS, when you see a W, it means widening. And so alt right now will return a type. In this case, when we're doing alts, it keeps returning this search type. But what if I want to return, if none of this stuff is here, I want to return the number 3 down here. Well, it's going to give me all kinds of red saying, hey, this isn't going to feed in there right. Because getOrElse expects everything to be congruent between here or here. And 3 isn't a type of string, and it's not a type of search type. So what can we do? What if we want to return a 3? Well, you put a W here, and it widens it. So now this can return either a search type or a number. We've just widened it, and it automatically calculates the types and gives you the red squiggles in the right place. The alt works very much the same. If we have altW here, and I can do the same thing, and I can, do a sum of my name, an object here, and because I widened it, it will say it can be an option of search type, or it can be this option with the name of string, and it automatically does all that for us. If I take the W out, I'll get an error and it'll cry. So when I want to widen something, this is what I have to do. So the last thing I promised to show you was the Interop, and we are going to use tryCatch for this. Sometimes when you're using somebody else's library, they throw an exception and blows up your app. You don't want it to. You'd rather have a none instead. So we'll make this function here called throws things, and we will say throw new error, it broke, and then we will say const result equals throws things, console.log, json.stringify result. It never even gets to the json.stringify, as you can see, because it just breaks and gives us an error. Maybe we don't want that error, so what can we do? Well, that's exactly what this tryCatch is for. We call it tryCatch, which takes a function with no argument and calls something internally that may or may not throw an exception. In this case, it does throw an exception. And this time, we get a none rather than it blowing up our app. Our app works correctly. If this returned correctly, you could say return 5, and it will return a sum instead of the raw return value. That's pretty sweet. What if you wanted to put it in a pipe and you wanted to use some arguments? Let's take a look-see. So I could say that I want to grab the result of pipe here, and I want to have a string, none of this matters, and I want to pass it into here. Don't matter, string. and we will return don't matter. Well, first, let's throw our exception to show you that it works. So we're going to wrap this into a different function. This function will take the string we've passed in, and then it will call tryCatch, and it won't have any arguments here, but then on throws things, it will take that S, and that properly gets us a none. So I could take this and do that, and it properly gets us a sum, and we've passed our variable in even though this doesn't take any variables. Next time we're going to be going over the do notation, and I think that's really interesting. I really like it, so I think you should join me for that one. Have a great day.